Hello everybody, my name is Antoine Arjakovsky'ego. I am French, I am working in Paris at the Collège des Bernardins, and I'm research director at the Collège des Bernardins. And I'm glad to speak with you about this subject, Europe after the virus. What should we do? It's a difficult question, but I'm glad to share some of my thoughts with you. It's a difficult subject because, as you know, it's a serious crisis on the economic level. In France, for instance, in 1 month, we had new unemployed people, 400,000 new unemployed people in 1 month. And it's, just for France. I don't speak about the whole Europe. But it's also a moral crisis. In 2 months, 100,000 people died because of the virus in the EU, and I don't speak about the 40,000 people who died in the UK. So everybody understands that it's a kind of sign, and there is a longing for a new world. There is a lot of discussions in France, everywhere in Europe, about the day after, the world after. And this is why when we speak about a possible answer to the crisis, we need to have a little philosophical approach, historical approach, even theological approach before giving some concrete results, concrete proposals. As I said, there is an understanding that we need to change our paradigm. We need to get out of the neoliberal paradigm, and lots of economists are speaking about this problem with neoliberalism. In France, for instance, Thomas Piketty. But already in 2008, we were speaking about the crisis not only of economics, but on a more intellectual level of the paradigm of neoliberalism. So my question is why we didn't change anything after 2008. In 2008, for in George Soros published a book saying, I was wrong. I was believing as a dogma in, for instance, the transparency of the markets, and I was wrong. There is no transparency of the markets. This is a mythology of neoliberalism. There is a banker, Stephen Green, who said that, yes, there is something wrong because the main problem is greed. And there is no way to control this greed, especially on the financial markets. The problem of l'avidité, greed. In France, the president Nicolas Sarkozy had this awareness of the problem, also because Michel Candesu told him about this problem with greed. And he asked to Joseph Stiglitz, the economist, but also to Amartya Sen and to Jean-Paul Fitoussi to think about a new indicator of development. He understood that the growth domestic product indicator is too much quantitative and not enough qualitative. And there was a report that was done, but nothing was done after that. And so my hypothesis is to say that if we didn't change anything, it's because we understood the crisis of the neoliberalism. We understood that this crisis of neoliberalism is a crisis of consciousness, of the level of the postmodern consciousness, but there was no higher level, who could give new ways at that time. Not enough people understood that. Of course, there was what I call the consciousness, the spiritual consciousness, which is higher, because all levels of consciousness are spiritual, but what I call the spiritual level of consciousness is when you are aware that spirituality, ethical approach should be at the heart of your epistemology. And that was not the case for the majority of the elite in France and in Europe. So this is why I think it is important today to take some time in order to understand what is wrong with the previous epistemologies. And there is an economist which I appreciate very much. She's in Oxford. Her name is Kate Raworth, and she wrote a book, The Dognut Economics. And I think it's really a level of spirituality. It's a higher level than the neoliberalism. First of all, because herself, she says, we need to be inspired by the religious traditions of the West, the idea of the common good of the European Western tradition, that economy should be connected with the common good. But we also need to hear what the religion from Asia have to say also on economics, and especially the concept of harmony with nature in particular. So the Dognut Economics, in this book that she published 2 or 3 years ago, she explains that economics is not a neutral science. There is the 4 level of consciousness: the classical level of consciousness, the modern level of consciousness, the postmodern of consciousness, which is the neoliberal, and the spiritual level of consciousness. The classical level of consciousness in economics, it's Adam Smith. This idea of the invisible hand which balances between supply and demand. There is a theology in this idea of the invisible God who is present through this invisible hand. Already after the Second World War, it was criticized by famous economists like Karl Polanyi, for instance. It was criticized also by John Maynard Keynes. Keynes, it's a typical economist from another level of consciousness, the modern level of consciousness, which doesn't want to deal with God in economics, who consider that states should organize economics and not God. And this is why in France we spoke about l'État-providence, where state is providential, state is organizing the common good. And there is a third level of consciousness in economics, a postmodern one, which is the neoliberal one, with famous economists like Paul Samuelson, Simon Kuznets, Milton Friedman, and the Chicago Boys, the monetary economy. And what is interesting in the book of Kate Raworth, that she criticized this level of consciousness, explaining that, let's say, Kuznets, who is the one who invented this indicator of the gross domestic product, himself was aware that it's not the right indicator to calculate the welfare of the people. It's not a good indicator to calculate the development of economics. And the same for Samuelson. Samuelson was too much theoretical for Kate Raworth because he didn't take into account the necessity of energy for economics. These economists, neoliberal economists, they were not seeing anymore the state at the center of economics, but only individual. It's the triumph of individualism. And this is why she explains that it's wrong on the ecological level, but also on the social level. And this is why she says we need to have this new spiritual level in economics. And I would like to quote Kate Raworth. So I am quoting Kate Raworth. So the metaphor she chose with the image of the doughnut, it's a circular brioche, appears that its heart is that of balanced human prosperity in a flourishing network of life. So I'm quoting Kate Raworth. What exactly is doughnut? In short, it is a radically new compass to guide humanity in this century. And it points to a future that could meet everyone's needs while preserving the living world on which we all depend. Below the social foundation of the doughnut are the human well-being shortages faced by those who lack essentials such as food, education, and housing. Beyond the ecological ceiling is an excess of pressure on life-giving systems through climate change, ocean acidification, and chemical pollution, for example. But between these two sets of boundaries is a nice place, clearly shaped like a donut, a space that is both environmentally safe and socially just for humanity. The task of the 21st century is unprecedented to bring all of humanity into this just and safe space. So we understand with this quote of Kate Raworth that the first thing to do is to change our indicator, not to have anymore the growth domestic product, but this new compass that Kate Raworth proposed, which I think is really important. It's of course important what the European Commission has done. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Council also, this 500 billions of euro for future investments, this also suspension of budgetary rules, which is for the first time of the European Union since the euro. This is really important, but it's, short-term decision. The real decision is to have this new horizon, this new direction for development, which would be based on a new consciousness and a new epistemology. I am convinced by this, and I consider that that will have another consequence to insist much more on European culture. European culture is very important on the economic level already. It's the third major industry in Europe. But the budget for culture at the level of the European Commission, it's 0.001%, which is nothing, which means that we don't care about consciousness, we don't care about the soul of Europe, and if we don't care about consciousness, spiritual consciousness, a soul for Europe, culture, civilization, then we will not be able to have a new civilization of peace, of justice, of safe ecology, of solidarity. Well, this is why I would like to conclude on this issue. We need a new consciousness, a spiritual consciousness. It doesn't mean that we need to put a cross on the classical, on the modern, on the postmodern consciousness. We just need, first of all, to understand that there is a difference between these different levels of consciousness, that all of them are important, but the spiritual one will allow us to propose a new stage in the development of the European Union after the European Union of the markets, European Union of culture. Thank you.